She loved to dance.
Come on, Relisha, flex it.
She had a mouth on her. Her mouth was sassy, but not too sassy.
I love you.
People are asking the question, who failed Relisha? Who do you think failed Relisha?
Today we're taking it back to 2014, to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. This is a story that has always stuck with me and still bothers me to this day. The case of Relisha Rudd. It was one that shook the D.C. area and was just all wrong from the beginning. Relisha Rudd was an African-American 8-year-old girl who went missing from the D.C. General Shelter March 1st, 2014, and hasn't been seen since. The case received little to no attention outside of the Washington, D.C. area, leading to criticism that it was all due to her being a Black girl from a low-income area. Let's take it back to 2014 and dive a bit deeper into the case. This is the story of Relisha Rudd. Relisha was last seen in Washington, D.C. in March 2014. She was in the care of Khalil Malik Tatum at the time. For over a year, Relisha's family had been residing in a homeless shelter in the former D.C. General Hospital. At the time, it was the largest shelter in the district, housing hundreds of families and as many as 600 children. Tatum worked there as a janitor. He befriended Relisha's family, which included her mother and 3 younger brothers. He offered gifts to Relisha, including a tablet, a manicure, and even took her to see Disney on Ice. Eventually, Relisha's mother even allowed him to take Relisha away, allegedly to stay overnight with him and his grandmother. Relisha even called him Goddaddy. He also had contact with other young girls living at the shelter and offered them gifts of money, although he never interacted with any of the young boys. The shelter supposedly had a strict no fraternization rule for their employees, and they were supposed to terminate anyone who violated that rule. However, Tatum was never disciplined for his actions. In late February, Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, asked Tatum to care for her. She later said she wanted Relisha to be able to escape the conditions at the shelter, which were filthy, chaotic, crime-ridden, infested, had no playground. Definitely not a place for any child to live. On March 19th, social workers came to the shelter to talk to Young about Relisha's absences from school. She had missed over 30 days by that time, but many of the absences had been excused because Young told the school Relisha was under the care of a Dr. Tatum. On February 25th, the day Young placed Relisha in Tatum's care, she accumulated her 5th unexcused absence, and the staff at her elementary school scheduled a parent-teacher conference for March 5th. Young did attend the conference, and they told her about support services to ensure Relisha's attendance at school. When she did show up for class, she was considered a quiet and well-behaved student. There were reports that Relisha was at school on March 5th and March 7th, but the last confirmed sighting of her was March 1st. On March 10th, school officials called Tatum and told him he had to provide a medical reason and documentation for Relisha's continued absences. He said he was treating her for neurological problems and he was going to discharge her by the end of the next week. She accumulated another 5 unexcused absences from school, although her younger brothers continued to attend. On March 13th, she reached her 10th unexcused absence. As was required by law, the school reported the family to the Children and Family Services Agency, also known as CFSA, for educational neglect. CFSA didn't consider it a high priority, however, and it wasn't until March 19th that a CFSA social worker called Tatum and arranged to meet with him later in the day. He didn't show up for the meeting, and he left the shelter early that day before the end of his shift. The social worker learned he wasn't really a doctor and immediately called the abuse hotline and the police.
The story just keeps getting worse. Disturbing new details tonight in the search for Relisha Rudd, the missing 8-year-old from Washington, D.C.
Now, the Amber Alert system still has only been activated in Washington, D.C., not here or in Virginia, but now the FBI is involved, which does help spread the word across the country about Relisha Rudd and the man who left with her. The search for Relisha Rudd has expanded up and down the East Coast, with this billboard in South Baltimore and others alerting drivers to the case.
When the authorities asked Young where her daughter was, Young stated Relisha and Dr. Tatum were at a medical conference in the Atlanta, Georgia area. She said they left March 8th and she didn't know when they would be back, but that she talked to her as recently as March 17th. Calls to Tatum's cell phone went directly to voicemail. One of Young's relatives went to his apartment on Hayes Street to see if Relisha was there, but no one was home. Young didn't want to file a police report saying Relisha was safe, but the police began a missing persons investigation immediately.
Is wanted for murder in connection with the death of his wife at a motel in Oxon Hill. Investigators have released this video of Tatum walking through a hotel in Northeast Washington with Relisha Rudd. About the same time that video was taken, social workers were called to the D.C. General Shelter where Rudd had been living with her mother and her 3 younger brothers. She'd missed so many days of school that they'd become concerned. Authorities are now raising questions about Rudd's grandmother, Melissa Young, and her mother, Shamika Young. They say family members helped deceive school officials, giving them a number for a Dr. Tatum who was caring for Relisha Rudd.
I think assured the school that the child had been ill and gave some detailed information around that.
But when the social workers got to the shelter, they realized there was no Dr. Tatum and the search for the girl began. Even then, police say Rudd's mother would not allow them to issue an Amber Alert. That only happened, and only in the District of Columbia, after Khalil Tatum's wife was found dead. Meanwhile, investigators went back to the beginning. Today, dozens of police cadets searched the area around the shelter again.
They're doing a door-to-door canvass to try to see if they can locate any witness who we have not yet interviewed.
Key question is one that police haven't answered yet. They have not released any information about which direction Khalil Tatum might have been heading after he left Washington.
Now that the FBI is involved, the reward for information leading to the arrest has gone up. The reward now sitting at $70,000 as they try to find Khalil Tatum and little Relisha Rudd.
Tatum was already wanted on a charge of car theft, and after his wife's body was found, he was additionally charged with murder. He had been arrested multiple times before breaking and entering, but his only prior felony conviction had been for larceny decades earlier. Some say the reason why he killed his wife was because she knew more than what he wanted anyone to know about what he did with Relisha. Police learned that on March 1st, Tatum bought a box of 42-gallon trash bags and some lime, which can be used to speed up decomposition. They stated that they believed that he had murdered Relisha. On March 31st, police found the body of Tatum at Kenilworth Park in Aquatic Gardens. He had shot himself with the same gun used to kill his wife. However, there was still no sign of Relisha, and the police stopped searching the park a few days later.
DC reporter Cameron Thompson with 99.1. You have just breaking news. Tell us what's happening.
Well, Jane, just 30 minutes ago, you were playing the tape from earlier this afternoon about the fact that they had found a body, a male body, in the park that they were searching for Relisha Rudd. And just 30 minutes ago, police now saying that they are tentatively, stressing the word tentatively, identifying the body as that of Khalil Malik Tatum, who they believe took Rudd, and this was likely a suicide. Now, police saying they don't normally identify a body this quickly, but in this manner, but are making an exception because of the case. They're saying that they can offer this tentative identification through his physical appearances and the fact that what they found is consistent with the information of what led them to the park in the first place. And the official confirmation will still have to come from the medical examiner, along with how long that body has actually been there.
Tentatively identified as the little girl's abductor. Okay, so if the child abductor is dead, what did he do with this precious, innocent 8-year-old girl who cannot defend herself? Let's go over the timeline now. Little Relisha was last seen with Tatum on March 1st, okay? 1 month ago, cops say the very next day, Tatum bought trash bags, a shovel and lime. We know that lime is often used to keep the odor down. So is that an ominous sign Okay, he then went to the same park where the body of this man, tentatively identified as Tatum, was found just a little while ago. All right? So what was he doing between the last time we saw him and today? Well, it's a very, very long timeline. We'll show you as we go along. But the bottom line to me, John Lieberman, is that he reportedly shoots his wife dead in a hotel room on March 20th, and we're leading up to that. And then he gets a ride from a friend to the Metro train station. So on March 20th, could this child have already been dead?
Well, that's right, and there's a huge lag time because of also inconsistent stories told by this little girl's mother as well. We'll get to that. I want to add a couple details, Jane, that I'm learning from my police sources in Maryland and in Washington. One is that they identified the suspect here through his tattoos, the tattoos that we were told to look out for when they issued the Amber Alert and the suspect be on the lookout. That's number one. Number two, they did find a gun, I'm being told, at the scene of this suicide, along with other, what I am being told is significant evidence in this investigation. And I'm also being told that the search for little Relisha will continue to focus on this 700-acre park. Cops believe this little girl is somewhere in that park. The question, of course, is she alive or dead?
Police Chief Kathy Lanier of the Metropolitan Police Department at the time was criticized for her acknowledgement that the Amber Alert she claimed was issued from Pennsylvania to Delaware down to Florida was actually a simple exchange of information about the Amber Alert sent out in D.C.
I only have the authority to issue in my own jurisdiction, but as soon as that Amber Alert is issued in the jurisdiction, we make a request through emergency management that Amber Alert that we issue here in D.C. be pushed out through MNET, which is an emergency management network, across the country.
Just 3 days earlier, the chief denied our findings that outside D.C., there were no Relisha Amber Alerts.
That's not true. I actually looked into that when I got that allegation. The Amber Alert was issued as far north as Pennsylvania and Delaware and as far south as Florida.
If that had only been true, TV stations across the East Coast would have been broadcasting Relisha's disappearance. But our investigation found the Amber Alert was only activated in the District of Columbia.
Relisha's family say they trusted Tatum with Relisha, and that the last time they spoke with him, he was supposed to be taking her to a hotel pool party at the Holiday Inn and even offered to buy her a swimsuit when he found out she did not have one. After that, they lost all contact with Tatum and Relisha.
The video is date marked February 26th, shopping bags in the hands of 8-year-old Relisha Rudd as she walks down the motel room hallway with the now dead suspect, Khalil Tatum. Family members say on that day, Tatum took her shopping, saying she needed a swimsuit for what he told them would be a swim party at this Holiday Inn Express on Bladensburg Road Northeast. A clerk says the motel does have an indoor pool. On that day, shortly before this surveillance video shows Khalil Tatum leading Relisha Rudd by the hand into that D.C. motel room, family members say he dropped by her aunt's home with Relisha. And when he found out she didn't have a swimsuit, he said he'd buy her one before going to that motel.
And as we mentioned, that was February 26th, just days before family members would lose track of who was taking care of Relisha.
And when her grandmother claims Tatum may have taken her to Atlanta. When was the last time you saw her?
Physically, the last time I saw her was when that video that was put on Instagram. Okay. That was filmed in here.
That was March 1st. Melissa Young says she called Tatum on March 12th to see if he could fix Relisha's tablet he bought for her.
I say, Mr. Tatum, have you talked to Relisha or do you have Relisha? His answer to me was no, he don't have her. So then he said, do you know where I am? And I'm like, yeah, you should be home getting ready to go out of town on your trip. This is when he was going to Atlanta, Georgia. So he was like, yeah, you're right, but I'm already in Atlanta, Georgia. He said, we're already in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm like, who? You, your wife?
Relisha's family fired back at allegations from the school, claiming that they stated Relisha was in the care of a Dr. Khalil Tatum.
The grandmother says that if Tatum was passing himself off as a doctor, it was out without their knowledge. We have also learned there is a nuisance of urgency tonight to find this little girl. The grandmother says she recently began having seizures. Melissa Young, maternal grandmother of Relisha Rudd, says she is even more worried about her missing granddaughter because the 8-year-old may be in need of medication.
Relisha suffers with real bad headaches. She's been suffering with headaches since she was 1. And then like last year around October sometime, right before her birthday, she had what they call a seizure.
She says the family had been trying to get her in to see a neurologist to figure out why, and that Khalil Tatum, the janitor from the homeless shelter who likely has her, knew all of that.
But not one time has we asked him to pose as her doctor.
That is a startling accusation from city officials that Tatum posed as a doctor to explain the child's absences from school since late February and that her family was in on the hoax. Young says Tatum told them Relisha had been having headaches. Relisha's mother told the school the child was sick, and when they asked for documentation,
I says, no, I don't have a letter, but I got the number for the person that she's with.
And that was Tatum's number.
My daughter never told the school that Mr. Tatum was the doctor.
We also asked her about that chilling hotel surveillance video where the 8-year-old seemed comfortable with Tatum.
This is not a child that cries not to go with him. This is a child that would cry because she can't go with him.
Now the grandmother says she's just praying.
I got to get her back. I'm serious. I got to have her back.
Now, the grandmother says she believes that Relisha may be kept from any kind of news coverage because if she knew people were looking for her and she could get to a phone, she knows how to dial 911. She knows all of her family's telephone numbers. Tonight, she's just praying that police find her soon.
Lawmakers and the public criticize CFSA for failing to act sooner on Relisha's school absences and failing to remove her and her siblings from an abusive situation. The agency first had contact with Young when Relisha was a year old. And CFSA workers learned that Young's children weren't being fed adequately. Their home environment was filthy, and Relisha may have even been physically abused. In 2010, social workers further discovered that Young had medically neglected one of her children and that she left them unsupervised in environmentally unsafe conditions. Relisha's mother herself had grown up in the foster care system from the age of 9, as her father was not a part of her life and her mother had a substance abuse problem. She had been diagnosed with a mild mental disability and spent time in a psychiatric residential treatment facility as an adolescent. The complaints against the mother prior to Relisha's disappearance were all eventually dropped, and her children weren't removed from her custody until after Relisha disappeared. Relisha's brothers were then placed in foster care with the goal of eventually reuniting them with their parents. Shamika Young was investigated by a grand jury for possible obstruction of justice charges because of her inconsistent statements about her daughter's whereabouts. But in the end, no indictments were issued. The city of Washington investigated the events that led to Relisha's disappearance and concluded there was nothing more that either CFSA or the school could have reasonably done, and no justifiable government actions would have prevented Relisha's tragic disappearance. She remains missing until this day, and many authorities involved in the search for her believe she is deceased. July 11th was officially deemed as Relisha Rudd Remembrance Day, when residents of the D.C. area remember the 8-year-old girl who went missing from Northeast D.C. more than 5 years ago. As of 2019, D.C. police say they won't stop searching for Rudd until her case is closed. Officers have searched multiple sites in the past 5 years. In 2016, MPD worked with other agencies and renewed their search in the National Arboretum. In early 2018, dive teams combed the water of the Anacostia River, and in December of 2018, they searched tunnels under the D.C. General Homeless Shelter. None of the searches led to her discovery, and she still has not been found. In 2018, they released an age process image of how Rudd might look at age 12. She'll be 15 years old today. Years later, after Relisha's disappearance, Relisha's mother made an appearance on the Steve Wilkos show, along with her mother and child's father, to prove her innocence. However, in the end, only the godmother and the father took a test to prove their innocence, while Relisha's mother declined taking the lie detector test altogether.
I've never seen you cry. She's missing!
The FBI comes to you.
They conducted a manhunt.
Did you give your daughter to this guy?
No. Liar! I hate you!
You had a relationship with this janitor.
No, I did not.
Your mother says you did.
Stop lying!
There are a limited number of theories for what happened to Relisha, given Tatum's predatory behavior and violent murder-suicide shortly after her disappearance. Authorities generally believe that Relisha was either murdered by Tatum or was sold to sex traffickers. But the sex trafficking theory has been ruled out by D.C. Metropolitan Police detectives. In an interview with the Washington Post, a senior law enforcement official suspected that Tatum had been sexually exploiting Relisha and possibly pimping her to others, and may have killed his wife due to her finding out about his activities. Other theories are that Ricky Sheridan Lyles Sr., who is Tatum's brother-in-law, may be a part of this and could have killed Tatum. Shamika Young stated on the Steve Wilkos show that Tatum was shot twice. Lyles was questioned, but they ruled him out as not being a point of interest. So in the beginning of this video, I stated that this is a case that has always stuck with me. It still bothers me to this day. The very shelter that Relisha stayed, DC General Shelter, many of my students stayed in that same shelter. Over the years, I've always chosen to teach in low-income areas just because of my personal preference. And when I think about that little girl, I think about the fact that that could have been any one of my students. That could have been anyone's child. You know, at the time, I believe I was teaching that grade or a grade above that grade. I'm not really sure, but I know that my students were close in age. And even when you think about the school and, you know, the failure to report the consistent absences or the teacher that was in that classroom, I don't understand. I don't think it'll ever sit right with me that a child can go missing for 30 days and no one kind of puts the fire on to say, you know what, we need to do something. Something's not right. You know, doctors' notes have to be investigated. If a child is sick, the documentation needs to be provided from the beginning. Phone calls need to be made. You know, of course I won't say the school, but the school definitely dropped the bomb on this one. And the fact that no teachers were held accountable, no administrators were held accountable, it's just the grim reality that the conditions that we have to deal with teaching in low-income areas. And again, I've worked in great schools in low-income areas. I've worked in horrible schools in low-income areas. So all of them are not the same, but you know, you do have to set the tone. You know how they say that people aren't a product of their environment? Just because a school is located in a low-income environment does not mean that the children within that building should be treated as a low priority. The school failed Relisha, her mother failed her, the people who were around Relisha's mother that saw that she herself needed help failed Relisha. I pray that this baby girl's spirit is at rest and that she no longer feels any hurt or pain. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. This was the story of Relisha Rudd.